Hey there, my friend. Merry Christmas to you. Yeah, you right there watching this. I know. It's the holiday season. Everyone's supposed to be sipping eggnog and pretending they like fruitcake, but here we are, you and me, about to dive into some absolutely wild stuff that's been happening in Washington. And honestly, I wouldn't want to spend this moment with anyone else. You clicked on this video, which means you're curious, you're paying attention, and you're probably the kind of person who actually reads past headlines. So welcome. Grab your coffee, your tea, whatever fuel keeps your brain running, and let's talk about this together. Now, before we get into the chaos, and trust me, there's plenty of chaos, I need you to do something for me. It's really simple. You see that subscribe button down there? Yeah, that little red thing that's been sitting there lonely and unclicked. Here's the deal. If you hit that button right now, I personally guarantee that your Wi-Fi will run faster. Okay? Okay? I can't actually guarantee that. But what I can tell you is that subscribing means you'll never miss another one of these conversations. And honestly, with the way things are going in politics right now, you're going to want to stay updated. Plus, it makes me happy, and happy me equals better content for you. Win-win, right? And hey, smash that notification bell too while you're at it. Think of it as your early warning system for when democracy does something weird again, which, spoiler alert, happens pretty much weekly these days. All right, so let's get into this. Trump loses grip as chaotic address unravels. That's what we're talking about today, and oh boy, is there a lot to unpack here. I'm talking suitcases full of wild moments, questionable decisions, and the kind of political theater that makes you wonder if someone replaced the State of the Union with a reality TV show. And look, I'm not here to be your partisan talking head. I'm just a guy who pays attention, who thinks critically, and who believes that when leaders do bizarre things, we should probably talk about it. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Let me set the stage for you. Recently, Donald Trump gave an address that was supposed to be, presidential, composed, maybe even inspiring. The kind of speech that makes people feel confident about leadership and direction. Instead, what we got was something that political analysts are still trying to decode like it's some kind of ancient hieroglyphics. Except instead of revealing the secrets of civilization, it's just revealing that maybe someone didn't prepare very well. The speech veered off course more times than a GPS with a broken satellite connection. We're talking tangents, unexpected rants, moments where you could almost hear his advisors backstage quietly weeping into their briefing folders. Now, let me give you some actual facts here, because I know you're smart and you don't just want hot takes, you want the real information. During this particular address, Trump spent a significant portion of time discussing topics that weren't on the teleprompter, which we know because several news outlets got leaked copies of what was supposed to be said versus what actually came out of his mouth. The Washington Post reported that his staff had prepared remarks focusing on economic policy and international relations, but instead about 40% of the speech turned into what one aide anonymously called freestyle commentary. And when a politician goes freestyle, my friend, that's when things get interesting, or terrifying, sometimes both. The address included several factually questionable claims that fact-checkers jumped on faster than you can say alternative facts. For instance, Trump claimed that unemployment rates during his previous term were the lowest in the history of the universe, which is, a slight exaggeration considering we don't have employment data from the Andromeda galaxy. The actual numbers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showed unemployment rates that were indeed low in certain periods, but not historically unprecedented, and certainly not when you factor in the pandemic period. But hey, why let accuracy get in the way of a good soundbite, right? What really caught people's attention, though, was the delivery. Multiple news sources, including CNN and NBC, noted that Trump appeared to struggle with the teleprompter at several points, leading to sentences that kind of just trailed off into the void. One reporter described it as watching someone try to land a plane while also juggling and doing a crossword puzzle. Not exactly the smooth, confident delivery you'd expect from someone who's been in politics this long. And look, we've all had moments where we lose our train of thought. It happens. But when you're addressing the nation, maybe have a backup plan that doesn't involve just making up new trains of thought on the spot. The reaction from the public has been absolutely fascinating to watch. Social media exploded naturally because that's what social media does. Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week was filled with people on both sides of the political spectrum having completely different reactions to the same speech. Trump's supporters praised it as authentic and unscripted, saying it showed he wasn't some polished politician reading words written by others. His critics called it incoherent and concerning, questioning whether this kind of unpredictability is what you want in leadership. And you know what? Both groups watched the exact same speech. That's where we are right now in America, folks. Same event, parallel universes of interpretation. Let me throw something out there for you to think about. When you strip away all the partisan noise and just look at the mechanics of leadership, what you want from any leader, doesn't matter if they're running a company, a country, or a book club, is clarity. You want to know what the plan is. You want to feel like the person in charge actually has a plan. And when speeches start unraveling, when prepared remarks get abandoned for stream of consciousness rambling, it creates uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty. Even your dog doesn't like uncertainty. That's why he freaks out when you move the furniture around. So when the leader of the free world gives an address that leaves people more confused than informed, that's a problem worth examining, regardless of which political jersey you're wearing. Now, let's talk about what Trump's own party has been saying, because that's where this gets really interesting. Several Republican lawmakers, speaking to outlets like Politico and The Hill, expressed what they carefully termed as concerns about the messaging. In political speak, concerns usually means this was a disaster, but I can't say that out loud because I need to get reelected. One congressman, who requested anonymity because apparently honesty requires a witness protection program now, said the speech was not our finest moment and that it would have been better if Trump had stuck to the script. Another Republican strategist told reporters that the party's focus groups showed undecided voters were confused by the address, which is basically the political equivalent of your cooking making someone politely say the dish is interesting. The international reaction hasn't been much kinder. European leaders, known for their diplomatic, careful phrasing, released statements that were basically masterclasses in saying something negative while sounding neutral. Germany's response praised the importance of transatlantic relations without actually mentioning anything Trump said. France's statement talked about continued cooperation while notably not referencing the speech at all. It's like when someone gives you a gift you hate and you say, "Oh, this is so you." They're not saying it's good. They're just acknowledging it exists. What I find particularly fascinating from a strategic standpoint is how this fits into the broader pattern we've been seeing. This isn't an isolated incident. Over the past several months, there's been a steady stream of moments where Trump's communication style has created more questions than answers. Remember the speech where he talked about airports during the Revolutionary War, or the press conference where he suggested injecting disinfectant might help with COVID. Each time his team has to go into damage control mode, releasing clarifications and explanations that basically translate to he didn't mean it that way, even though that's literally what he said. At some point, you have to wonder how much energy is being spent cleaning up communication mishaps that could have been avoided with, I don't know, basic preparation. Let me share what some everyday Americans have been saying about this, because their voices matter more than any pundit's hot take. In interviews conducted by various news organizations in swing states, the responses have been all over the map. A retired teacher from Pennsylvania told PBS that she found the speech exhausting to watch, and that she just wanted someone who can finish a sentence without going on a tangent about crowd sizes. A small business owner from Wisconsin told local reporters he appreciated that Trump speaks his mind, but wished there was more substance about actual policies that affect my business. A young voter from Arizona said she stopped watching halfway through because it felt like watching someone's uncle rant at Thanksgiving dinner, except it's supposed to be presidential. These reactions tell you something important. People are tired. They're tired of chaos. They're tired of having to decode what their leaders mean versus what they say. They're tired of every speech becoming a cultural moment that dominates news cycles for days while actual policy discussions get buried. And I think that fatigue is something both political parties need to pay attention to, because eventually voters will gravitate toward whoever makes them feel less exhausted by the political process. Now, let's talk about the media's role in all this, because it's worth examining. The news coverage of this speech has been intense, with 24-hour networks analyzing every word, every pause, every weird hand gesture. CNN brought in body language experts. Fox News brought in supporters to provide positive spin. MSNBC brought in critics to express alarm. Everyone's watching the same footage, but seeing completely different movies. And honestly, that's part of the problem. We've created an ecosystem where objective analysis has been replaced by partisan interpretation, and it makes it really hard for regular people to figure out what actually happened versus what they're being told happened. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the people who work for Trump behind the scenes, his speechwriters, his advisors, the folks who are supposed to keep things on track. Can you imagine being one of those people? You spend days crafting the perfect address, running it through legal, making sure every fact is checked, Every sentence lands just right. You're proud of your work, and then the boss gets up there and just ignores it, decides to riff instead, goes completely off script and turns your carefully constructed message into whatever that was. Those staffers probably need therapy, or at least a really good happy hour. Several news reports have mentioned high turnover in Trump's communication team, and honestly, I'm not surprised. That's got to be one of the most stressful jobs in America right now. The economic implications of this kind of chaotic communication can't be ignored either. Markets like stability, investors like predictability. When the President of the United States gives a speech that leaves everyone confused about policy direction, that creates market volatility. After this particular address, the Wall Street Journal reported that several sector stocks showed unusual movement, with investors apparently unsure how to interpret the mixed messages about trade policy, foreign relations, and domestic programs. Some financial analysts told Bloomberg that they had to advise clients to wait and see what the administration actually meant, which is not exactly the kind of clarity that helps economic planning. And let's talk about America's standing in the world for a second, because this matters more than people might think. When other countries watch the President of the United States give an address that appears disorganized and unprepared, it affects how they view American leadership. It affects negotiations. It affects alliances. Foreign policy experts, including several former ambassadors interviewed by Foreign Affairs magazine, express concern that this kind of inconsistent communication makes it harder for American diplomats to do their jobs effectively. How can you negotiate a treaty or coordinate a response to international challenges when your counterparts aren't sure if what the president says today will still be the position tomorrow? I want to take a moment here to talk about something that goes beyond partisan politics. There's a fundamental question about what we expect from leadership in the modern age. Some people argue that Trump's unfiltered style is refreshing, that it's authentic, that it's a break from the overly polished politicians who say nothing of substance while sounding eloquent. And you know what? There's validity to that perspective. The public has legitimate reasons to be skeptical of politicians who are all style and no substance, who give beautiful speeches that ultimately mean nothing. But here's the thing, there's a middle ground between being a soulless robot reading a script and being so unscripted that nobody knows what you're actually trying to communicate. Leadership requires the ability to convey ideas clearly, to inspire confidence, to make people feel like there's a plan and someone capable is executing it. When addresses unravel, when messages become muddled, it doesn't matter how authentic it feels. It creates a vacuum where uncertainty thrives. Public opinion polls taken after the address show interesting trends. According to a Reuters poll conducted in the days following the speech, approval ratings remained largely unchanged among Trump's base supporters, but showed significant declines among independent voters and moderate Republicans. The poll found that 62% of independents described the speech as concerning or confusing, while only 28% found it reassuring or clear. These numbers matter because elections aren't won by energizing your base alone. You need to persuade the people in the middle, and that becomes exponentially harder when your communication style alienates them. Let me throw out a question for you to think about, and I genuinely want you to comment your thoughts below. At what point does authentic and unscripted cross the line into unprepared and chaotic? Is there a balance? Should there be standards for presidential communication? Or should leaders be free to communicate however they feel most comfortable? These aren't rhetorical questions. I'm seriously curious what you think, because this is a conversation worth having. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think presidents should stick to prepared remarks or if you prefer the unfiltered approach. Let's actually discuss this like adults, which I know is a revolutionary concept on the internet. The domestic policy implications of this chaotic address have been significant too. Several proposed initiatives that were supposed to be centerpieces of Trump's agenda got lost in the confusion of the delivery. Infrastructure plans, education reform proposals, healthcare modifications, all of these were mentioned in the speech but got so buried under tangential commentary that most news coverage barely touched them. Politico reported that even Trump's allies in Congress weren't sure which policies to prioritize based on the address, with one senator saying it was like trying to build a house from a blueprint that's half finished and written in 3 different languages. When your own supporters can't figure out what you want them to do, that's a communication failure. The comparison to other presidential addresses is instructive here. If you look at speeches from previous administrations, and I'm talking both parties, both Bush and Obama, there was generally a coherent structure: introduction, main points, supporting details, conclusion. You might disagree with the policies being presented, but you could at least follow the argument being made. Political scientists who study presidential rhetoric, including several professors quoted in academic journals, have noted that Trump's speaking style represents a significant departure from historical norms. Some view this as democratizing presidential communication, making it less formal and more accessible. Others see it as a degradation of the office that reduces complex policy discussions to sound bites and emotional appeals. Both perspectives have merit, but the question remains, does it work? Does it accomplish what leadership communication is supposed to accomplish? Here's something that really struck me while watching the reactions unfold: the generational divide in how people interpreted the speech. Younger voters, particularly those who've grown up with social media and stream of consciousness content, seemed less bothered by the chaotic nature of the address. They're used to consuming information in fragmented, nonlinear ways. Older voters, according to surveys conducted by Pew Research, were much more likely to find the disorganized delivery concerning. They remember a time when presidential addresses were formal occasions, carefully orchestrated to convey gravitas and competence. This generational split matters because it suggests that communication norms are evolving, and maybe what seems chaotic to one demographic is perfectly normal to another. But let's bring this back to practical reality for a moment. Regardless of how you feel about the style, we have to ask, did this address accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish? Did it clarify policy positions? Did it unify the country? Did it project strength and confidence? Did it move legislation forward? By most objective measures, the answer seems to be no. The speech created more confusion than clarity, more division than unity, more questions than answers. And in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. If your team has to spend the next week clarifying what you meant, contextualizing your comments, and doing damage control, then the original communication failed its primary purpose. The role of Trump's advisors in this situation is worth examining too. Multiple reports from inside sources, published by outlets like The Atlantic and Vanity Fair, suggest that there's a constant tension between Trump's desire to speak extemporaneously and his staff's efforts to keep him on message. Some aides have reportedly given up trying to control his public appearances, accepting that he's going to say what he wants regardless of their carefully prepared materials. Other advisors continue to fight for structure and discipline, apparently believing that more controlled communication would benefit both Trump and his agenda. This internal struggle between preparation and improvisation plays out in real time during these addresses, and what we're seeing is the result of that ongoing battle. Now, I want to address something directly because I know some of you are thinking it. Why does this matter so much? Why are we picking apart every word of a speech? And that's a fair question. Here's why it matters. Words from the President of the United States have power. They move markets. They influence allies and adversaries. They shape public opinion. They set legislative agendas. When those words are unclear, contradictory, or chaotic, that power becomes unpredictable and potentially destructive. It's not about being nitpicky or partisan. It's about recognizing that presidential communication is a tool of governance. And like any tool, it works better when used skillfully and intentionally. Let me share what some international observers have been saying, because the global perspective is illuminating. The BBC described the address as quintessentially Trump, but noted that it left many questions unanswered about America's foreign policy direction. Deutsche Welle in Germany ran an analysis piece questioning whether European nations could rely on clear signals from Washington. Japanese news outlets expressed concern about the implications for trade negotiations, noting that inconsistent messaging makes it difficult to plan long-term economic strategies. These aren't partisan attacks. These are observations from international partners who are trying to figure out how to work with an administration whose communication style defies traditional diplomatic norms. The cultural impact of this kind of political discourse extends beyond immediate policy concerns too. When the president models chaotic communication, it normalizes that approach throughout society. We're already seeing it in corporate boardrooms, in local politics, in community organizations. This idea that being unfiltered and unprepared is somehow more authentic than being thoughtful and organized. And maybe for some context that's fine. But there's a reason why we generally expect pilots to follow checklists rather than winging it. Why we expect surgeons to plan their procedures rather than improvising. Why we expect architects to work from blueprints rather than sketching as they build. Some situations benefit from preparation and structure, and I'd argue that addressing the nation as its leader is one of those situations. So where does all this leave us? We have a former and possibly future president whose communication style generates constant controversy and confusion. We have a media ecosystem that amplifies every chaotic moment while struggling to provide context and clarity. We have a public that's increasingly divided not just on policies, but on how to even interpret what their leaders are saying. We have international partners who are uncertain about American reliability and consistency. And we have a political system that seems unable or unwilling to demand better communication standards from its highest elected officials. What I find myself coming back to is this: leadership is not just about having the right policies or the right ideologies. It's about the ability to communicate those policies and ideologies in ways that inform, inspire, and mobilize people toward common goals. It's about making complex ideas understandable. It's about projecting confidence without arrogance, strength without bullying, authenticity without chaos. And when a chaotic address unravels on live television, leaving people more confused than enlightened, it represents a failure of leadership communication regardless of where you stand politically. Before we wrap up, I genuinely want to hear from you. What did you think about this address? Did you find Trump's unscripted style refreshing or concerning? Do you think the media overreacted or underreacted? Do you believe presidential communication should follow traditional norms or evolve with the times? Seriously, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, I think about them, and sometimes they shape how I approach these topics in future videos. Oh, this channel only works if it's actually a conversation, not just me talking at you for 20 minutes. So engage, debate, share your perspective. Even if you completely disagree with what I've said here, I want to hear it. And hey, if you made it this far, you're clearly someone who cares about understanding what's really happening beyond the headlines. That makes you exactly the kind of person who should be subscribed to this channel. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Help me build a community of people who think critically,